Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm Nancy Cordes, and joining us now is White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Nancy.
First off, why did the president want to fire Special Counsel Mueller, and why did he decide not to?
Well, Nancy, the president's never intimated to me in any way a desire to fire Mueller. I think that there's been a lot of sensational reporting on that. Let's keep in mind a few things. That report dates to some June conversation, allegedly. We're now in January. Mueller is still a special counsel. Don McGahn is still running the White House counsel's office. Millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars have been wasted on an investigation that so far has proven no collusion with the Russians.
Well, the investigation's not over, right?
Of course it's not, because it's continuing to drag on, and it's dragged on for a long time at a great expense with yet no evidence of Russian collusion. And so the reality is that Mueller is still a special counsel. McGahn is still head of White House counsel's office. The president's never intimated to me in any way a desire to fire Robert Mueller.
Have you advised the president, have others around him advised him of the consequences of firing either a special counsel Mueller or Rod Rosenstein, who, recent reports have suggested the president has now turned some of his ire towards?
I have no reason to believe the president's considered firing him, so there's no reason for me to counsel him one way or the other on that, Nancy. I think that, as I said, he's never intimated that one way or another to me. It's not a conversation typically I'd probably be involved in, but there'd be no reason to raise it.
How serious do you think that this memo that purports to outline FBI mistakes when it comes to the investigation is? You just heard Congressman Will Hurd, who's on the House Intelligence Committee, say that he believes it should be released, at least among other members of Congress.
Right. Well, we haven't obviously read the memo. It's classified, so it's hard for me to speculate on what's in the memo. I do think that we typically prefer transparency, and so if there are concerns that I think would be helpful for Americans to know about it, we would be open for that being released.
Even if it reveals FBI sources and methods?
There's plenty of ways you can redact a document to make sure that methods are not revealed. But if there are serious concerns about unmasking that happened in the previous administration, then I think that the American people should know that.
I want to ask you about immigration. Lawmakers have been begging the White House for weeks to come out with your immigration plan. You do, and you get hit from all sides. You've got conservatives who are calling it amnesty. You've got Democrats saying that this is a false choice. Basically, you're creating a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, and then you're taking away a whole bunch of other rights in exchange. Well,
now let's keep in mind a few things, Nancy. When they say they've been waiting for us, the White House submitted our priorities many, many months ago. When General Kelly was still Secretary of DHS, he asked Congress to address this.
Even Republican leaders said they had no idea where the president stood.
I think that's a convenient explanation. We were very clear with Congress what we wanted. We put our priorities in writing and sent them to Congress on October the 8th. October the 8th. We sent another document back in December. What this piece finally did is it refined what our position is on the DACA population itself. And I think the president, as he said in that very public meeting at the White House, he said, I will give cover on my side. The question is Leader Schumer, Leader Pelosi stepping up to give cover to their side? They clearly have a radical left base that is putting pressure on them. And I understand the challenges of managing some of their conferences, but the president's put forward a tremendous compromise to get this solved once and for all. It's perplexed Congress for decades to get this. He's showing the leadership to finally get it done.
Democrats say that by preventing immigrants from sponsoring parents or adult children or siblings, you're tearing apart families, you're cutting legal immigration by 50%. In fact, here's what the largest Dreamer advocacy group said. Let's call this proposal for what it is: a white supremacist ransom note.
Yeah, that's absurd. That's even ridiculous to try to respond to. Here's what it does. What we're trying to do is we're trying to protect the nuclear family, Nancy. And so we're providing those visas for spouses and children, trying to protect that. What's happening right now in our visa system is you're providing visas for aunts and uncles and siblings that continue to go on, hence it's called chain migration. So therefore there's a 4 million backlog, so you can't get children and spouses in because you're taking care of so many different distant cousins. What our proposal does actually is it protects a nuclear family and focuses on them as opposed to extended relatives that are continuing to get into the country and get priority over children and spouses.
But doesn't that belong in a comprehensive immigration negotiation? This is a much more narrow plan that is related to this specific population, young people who were brought to the country illegally.
Congress will always have a reason to do something later as opposed to fixing a problem today. This president is trying to solve a problem that has been perplexing our country for decades. He's offered a very rational compromise to get it done. This was born out of many conversations with Democrats alike and Republicans to get to this point. It's actually will help us get it done and protect us so we don't have this problem several years from now. If you just do border security and DACA, all you're going to do is create an incentive for more people to try to flood the border because they're going to say, I'll get citizenship in the future too. You need to fix it all. There's lots of things we're not doing. We put aside a lot of our interior enforcement requests to say, let's keep this more focused. This is a very focused, rational proposal.
I've got about a minute left, so I want to ask you quickly about the State of the Union. The president giving his first State of the Union address on Tuesday, and he's going to outline a $1.7 trillion infrastructure plan. But if you look at the fine print, it's only about $200 billion in federal funds. Is it realistic to think that you can leverage another $1.5 trillion in private, state, local money when you're starting out with that little?
I think it's very realistic to leverage those dollars. I think as we continue to roll back the regulatory front, there'll be more private investment coming in. There are a lot of people who said the president couldn't create 2 million jobs in the first year, who said we wouldn't see unemployment at a 17-year low, who said we wouldn't see GDP at 3%, who also said that after the tax relief package in 1 month, 3.1 million Americans, 3.1 million workers have either received a pay increase or a bonus. The president's making an enormous impact on our economy. It's turning this country around. I wouldn't bet against him on the infrastructure plan either.
Something tells me the economy is going to be a big focus of his speech on Tuesday night. White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Nancy.
Appreciate it. And we'll be right back with our political panel. Don't go away. To help us make sense of this week's political news, we're joined now by Bloomberg White House reporter Jennifer Jacobs. Dan Balls is the chief correspondent at The Washington Post. Rachel Bade covers Congress for Politico. And Ed O'Keefe is a congressional reporter for The Washington Post, and he's also a CBS News contributor. Thanks, everyone, for joining me today. Jennifer, I want to start with you. You just heard Mark Short say that as far as he knows, the president has not expressed a serious interest or expressed an order to fire the White House special counsel. Is that true?
If you ask different White House aides, you hear different recollections. I've talked to at least a dozen White House officials about this, and some of them sincerely say, I don't remember the president ever saying anything like that. In fact, they say definitively he never ordered Don McGahn, the White House counsel, to fire Mueller. Apparently, this was a conversation with a very small, tight group. So it depends on who you talk to, but keep in mind, 48 White House officials, campaign staff, or people affiliated with the campaign have spoken with Mueller or to the congressional committees. That's a lot of people who are preparing for testimony or for speaking with Mueller. There's a particular group that share a lawyer. That's 3 people. That's Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, and Don McGahn share a lawyer. So they theoretically could be talking about their recollections back at the time, and this piece of history could have come up in one of those recollections. I've also heard from one person that there's some tension between Don McGahn and another White House lawyer, Ty Cobb, and that's where this could be coming from. So there's a lot of different theories, but depending on who you ask, some of them will sincerely say they have no recollection of this happening. Others say, yeah, but it was just to a tight audience.
Dan, even Republicans this week were not surprised to hear that the president mulled over the possibility of firing Mueller. After all, he's tweeted that this investigation is a witch hunt 22 times.
Yes, that's right. And I think that the reporting that has been done on this has been pretty clear. I mean, the story was broken by the New York Times. It was quickly confirmed by many other organizations, ours among them. I think that there's little doubt that this happened. And in some ways, there's not a surprise that it happened. I mean, there are a series of things that the president has said and done over the course of many months to indicate his distaste for this investigation and his desire in one way or another to get in the way of it. Now, what that adds up to is going to be left to the special counsel to make a declaration, and then people can draw further conclusions from that. But we know that he is unhappy with this investigation.
Ed, Senate aides tell me they're now working very quickly to try to combine these 2 bills that are out there that would basically protect the special counsel from firing. Does this incident give that legislation more momentum?
Conceivably, because here we are talking about it after months of not talking about it. It's 2 different plans that essentially permit judicial review in the event that special counsel would be fired. What's notable is that there are Republicans involved in this, because over the summer when this became an issue, they got concerned and understood that this could become a thing. The problem is, we've seen this morning and we've seen in recent days, Republican leaders say, we don't see a need necessarily to bring up this legislation right now. That said, I have can recall talking especially to Democratic aides in the last few months who said, if this had happened, or if it happens, in the midst of all the ongoing negotiations over the budget and immigration and the threats of shutdown, the Democrats would conceivably put a halt to it all and force the issue by either having that legislation attached to the bill or at least saying, we're not doing anything until you address this. But this isn't necessarily that, because it happened so many months ago and there's evidence that people stood in the way of it. It's if he tries again that you may see a grind to a halt on the Hill.
They're saying this is a red line. Rachel, at the same time, you've got House Republicans trying to give the president a little bit of cover and pushing this notion that the very foundations of this FBI investigation are flawed, are biased. Are they winning hearts and minds on that argument?
They're certainly winning over a lot of the Republican base. I think I saw a poll this week that said 75% of Republicans think that the Russia investigation is just to undermine the credibility of the president. Going back to this, I think Republican leaders are not necessarily going to put legislation on the floor to protect Mueller, and that's because this reporting, it happened 7 months ago, and they also note that he ultimately didn't do it.
Right.
And as Susan Collins mentioned in your interview this morning, he doesn't have the ability to do that. That's Rod Rosenstein, who is clearly at the DOJ and is still in his position and has said he is going to allow Mueller to do his job. At the same time, you see Republicans sort of holding up right now these text messages between two FBI officials they think had anti-Trump sentiments. One of them expressing how he or she did not want to probe Hillary Clinton very hard because they were worried she would win the presidency and she would be their future boss. So yes, they are trying to go after the FBI. I think Republicans are winning over their base on this, but most Americans still, of course, support Mueller.
And Dan, Rachel raises a good point. I mean, if the president wanted to fire Mueller, but at the end of the day didn't go through with it, does it matter?
Well, it matters because it does show his desire and sentiment, particularly at that moment. And it's important that Don McGahn stood in the way of it to the degree that how that all unfolded, we're not exactly sure, but Don McGahn, in one way or another, prevented it from happening. But to Rachel's point, I mean, if he moved to try to do this, there are other obstacles that he would face. But again, if he did it, and again were blocked, I think it would create an even bigger firestorm than this incident that we didn't know about at the time, other than his friend Chris Ruddy, who had indicated in a public interview with Judy Woodruff on PBS that the president was in fact considering this sort of thing. So it's not as though this was totally tightly held. I mean, he had obviously shared it with Mr. Ruddy of his desire at the time, but there are safeguards built in. But we, go back to the Saturday Night Massacre with Richard Nixon and during Watergate. It took a number of steps ultimately for that to be executed, but it could be the same kind of thing we would have this time.
I want to turn to immigration and Ed, ask you, now that the White House has finally laid out its stance, notwithstanding Mark Short saying it's actually been out there for months, does it give conservatives cover to support a Dreamer bill that they know is going to anger a significant segment of their base?
If the changes in family-based legal migration are part of the final package, and if they get the 25 to 30 billion in border security, yeah. But if not, they'll stand against it. I think what this plan from the White House, which is formally being released on Monday, shows now is that the debate over whether or not to legalize or provide legal protections to people who are protected by DACA is basically over. It's just an issue of how many. But with the president going all the way to 1.8 million, that basically settles it. The fact that Chuck Schumer went to the White House a little more than a week ago, sat with the president and basically agreed on $25 billion in border funding, means that that's over. Democrats have now flashed that card and said, if that's the price to pay, so be it. There will be some who don't like it, but he basically put them there. So the question is, are those other issues regarding family-based migration, changes to what's called the diversity lottery included? And that, I think, now is where the fight will be, because this is an issue of, can a DACA recipient's parents stay here legally? Can they bring a brother and sister? Could their spouse also get it if they're old enough and they're married? And those are emotional fights now over the size and scope of one's family once they get their legal status.
Right.
It's going to be a painful piece of the debate. It's why you're seeing some say, let's have a narrow debate over DACA and border security. That's Congress for, let's have an easier fight over border security and DACA, which we seem to basically have agreement on.
Jennifer, why did the White House suddenly come out in favor of a pathway to citizenship?
Well, they have been privately signaling that they would be willing to give the Dreamers a pathway to citizenship. The concession that they made here was going from the 690,000 to the 1.8 million. That is a change. Like Mark said, they've been saying that for a while, that they would allow the path to citizenship. They just didn't want them to show their cards on how many. But I was told by one Trump insider that this would help them with, for example, Republican college-aged women. A lot of things come down to, you know, the electorate and how things turn out in the vote. They also don't want to appear too nativist. That's another reason. But also, speaking of the vote, one thing to keep in mind is that these Dreamers wouldn't be able to vote themselves until about 2028, long after Trump is gone.
Right. This is a long pathway to citizenship. Rachel, you wrote this week about the fact that Speaker Ryan is essentially a centrist on this issue, but he's also afraid to cross conservatives.
Yeah, the immigration debate is not just about the future of Dreamers, it's about the future of a speaker. Paul Ryan has said many times that he is sympathetic to the Dreamers. He doesn't think they should be deported. They came here as young minors, only know the United States as home. However, he governs a very conservative House Republican conference, who, by the way, do not support a pathway to citizenship for this population. And they made him promise when he became Speaker that he would never put an immigration bill on the floor that does not get a majority of the majority. However, what we're talking about in the Senate right now probably would not get a majority of the majority. The one anecdote I would say anecdote for this toxic concoction for the Speaker is President Trump. If he embraces a bipartisan solution, maybe it protects Ryan.
Rachel, that's the last word. Thank you so much, Rachel, Ed, Dan, Jennifer. Appreciate you being with us today. And we'll be back with our conversation with Illinois Democrat Tammy Duckworth, who is expecting to break a big barrier in the Senate. Senator Tammy Duckworth is an Iraq War veteran, a double amputee, and soon she'll be the first senator to give birth while in office. The Illinois Democrat announced this week that she is expecting a second baby girl in April, a few weeks after her 50th birthday. She wants other women struggling with infertility to know what she went through. 10 years of trying to conceive her first child and a miscarriage, this time while campaigning for the Senate. What did your doctor say to you about the chances of getting pregnant at 49?
Well, he said it's the new 40. So he said a 50-year-old mom is a new 40. And I have the most wonderful fertility doctor, and he helped me with Abigail, and he just said, if you're willing to go through the process with me step by step, it will seem like it takes a long time, but we want to do this right. And he was right, and I just had to be patient and go through that. It's kind of like being a mom. You have no control.
I remember that feeling when I had one. I felt like a super mom. And then once you have the second one, all those illusions are shattered.
Oh, well, we'll see. Yeah, I didn't feel like a super mom during the first baby. I decided to run for the United States Senate when I was on maternity leave, which was a leap of faith to do that. So I was a congresswoman. I was trying to breastfeed, travel, campaign, do my job as a United States congresswoman. And it was really, really tough. There were a lot of tears and a lot of, why am I doing this? And I just want to be home with my daughter. But then I would come across a situation that needed to be fixed, like legislation that I could pass, and I realized, no, I have to do this. This makes me a better legislator.
One of the things that you noticed when you were doing all that traveling was that a lot of airports didn't have anywhere for you to nurse.
No, and I would go into airports and I said, well, it's the handicapped stall in the public toilet. And I was like, that's disgusting. You wouldn't eat a sandwich there. Why would you think that I should nurse my baby there or pump breast milk there? That's wrong. It was humiliating. And so I tried to pass some legislation on it. And it's out of committee. Mandatory nursing rooms for moms at airports, and hopefully we'll get an FAA bill and it'll become law.
Did you dream about going into politics before all of this happened?
Oh my Lord, never.
Duckworth was a helicopter pilot in the National Guard. Her call sign, Mad Dog. Shortly after she deployed to Iraq in 2004, her Black Hawk was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. As she was recovering, she got a surprise invitation 13 years ago this week.
It was Senator Durbin who found me in the hospital. He invited all Illinois servicemen and women at Walter Reed, all wounded warriors, to go to the State of the Union. And I was one of two who was well enough to go. It was my first trip out of the hospital. It was very emotional to go into that gallery and look down and see this democracy that I just sacrificed for. It was overwhelming. I mean, it still gets to me, that feeling. And I was missionless. I was missionless. I was a helicopter pilot with no legs, and I was trying to find a way to serve my country. And we were having issues at Walter Reed, and I just became an advocate for my buddies because I happened to be the highest ranking amputee patient. And so I met Senator Durbin that night, and he made the mistake of giving me his personal phone number. And I just started calling him. I didn't know any better. And after about 10 months of this, he called me up and he said, "You need to run for Congress." And that's how I got into this. It's crazy.
And now you're standing on the floor of the Senate, and taking on the president on military issues.
I have a message for Cadet Bone Spurs. If you cared about our military, you'd stop baiting Kim Jong-un into a war that could put 85,000 American troops and millions of innocent civilians in danger.
You called him a 5 deferment draft dodger.
4 for school and 1 for medical reasons that he can't even remember what foot the bone spur was in. I can still feel the hangnail on my right foot, and it's missing. And we have a guy who says that he had a bone spur that kept him out of Vietnam, but doesn't remember where it was.
Do you think that that disqualifies him from being commander-in-chief or making decisions about the military?
No, I think he was elected rightfully to be president of the United States, but I don't think that he has the right to question other people's support for our military, especially those of us who have served.
Duckworth is the first disabled woman in the Senate and the first member of Congress of Thai descent. That's a lot of firsts.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
Unintentional. Well, the whole being the first sitting senator to give birth, I think, is ridiculous. It's 2018. We need more female senators. We are only 22 of us. I've been a little overwhelmed by how landmark it is when it shouldn't be. It's a 21st century.
But even someone used to breaking barriers runs into obstacles now and then.
I was the 10th one in the House, so there was policy in the House, but there's no policy in the Senate. I have to figure that out.
She recently discovered that children are still prohibited on the Senate floor, which complicates her plans for maternity leave.
I'm going to take the time that I need with my daughter, but in the middle of all that, there might be days when I have to, we have a lot of close votes right now that I need to come in and not let the people of Illinois down.
Right.
But then what do I do with my baby?
So the Senate is behind the times, is what you're saying?
The Senate is behind the times, so we're gonna work on that.
And we'll be back in a moment. And that's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Nancy Cordes. Have a good one.